You think you know what's out there, don't you? The woods, just trees, wind, maybe the distant call of an owl. You pack your tent, your snacks, your sense of adventure, and you tell yourself you're ready. But the truth is, you're never really ready. Not for what waits in the dark, just beyond the reach of your flashlight. Not for the things that don't care about your plans, your phone signal, or your belief that you're safe. I used to be like you. I thought camping was about escaping the noise, finding peace under the stars, maybe telling a few ghost stories around the fire. But then I learned the hard way. Some stories aren't just stories. Some things you hear in the woods aren't just the wind. And once you've seen what I've seen, you'll never camp the same way again. Tonight, I'm going to share 3 true stories that happened to real people, including me. Stories that still haunt the edges of my sleep. One of them, in particular, keeps me up at night. I've never told it in full, and honestly, I'm not sure I should even be sharing it now. There's one detail I can't explain, something I found in the woods that night. I'll get to that if you make it to the end. So, wherever you are, maybe curled up on your couch, maybe listening with the lights off, just remember, the line between safety and terror is thinner than you think. Let's start with the first story. But remember, these aren't just stories. They're warnings. It started like every perfect camping trip should: 4 friends, a battered old SUV, and a weekend with nothing but the promise of freedom ahead of us. There was me, always the planner, the one who made sure we had enough food and remembered the bug spray. Then there was Jamie, who could make anyone laugh, even when the tent collapsed for the 3rd time. Mark, the skeptic, who rolled his eyes at every ghost story but still jumped at every snapping twig. And Sarah, who loved the outdoors more than any of us, her eyes lighting up at the first glimpse of the forest. We drove for hours, windows down, music blaring, the city fading behind us until all that was left was the endless green of the pines and the winding dirt road that led to our favorite spot. It was a place we'd found years ago, tucked away from the main trails, a clearing by a slow-moving river, ringed with wildflowers and shaded by ancient trees. The kind of place that felt untouched, like it belonged to us and us alone. Setting up camp was a comedy of errors. Mark's tent pole snapped. Jamie nearly set his marshmallows on fire. And Sarah kept insisting we were one with nature as she chased a squirrel away from our snacks. We laughed until our sides hurt, the kind of laughter that only comes when you're far from responsibility, when the world feels small and safe. As the sun dipped behind the trees, we built a fire and watched the sky turn from gold to indigo. The air was cool and clean, filled with the scent of pine and wood smoke. We told stories, roasted marshmallows, and let the silence settle around us, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant call of a loon. It was perfect, the kind of night you wish you could bottle and keep forever. If only we'd known what was watching us from the tree line, just beyond the reach of our laughter and light. If only we realized that something else had claimed this place long before we ever found it. The first sign that something was off came just as the last embers of our fire started to fade. We were sprawled around the fire pit, trading stories and half-hearted dares, when Sarah suddenly went quiet. She was staring into the woods, her marshmallow forgotten, brow furrowed. "Did you guys see that?" she whispered. Mark snorted. "See what?" "Another squirrel plotting to steal your granola bars." But Sarah didn't laugh. "No, seriously. I thought I saw a light. Like a lantern or something. Out there." She pointed into the darkness, where the trees pressed in close and the night seemed impossibly deep. Jamie leaned forward, squinting. "Maybe it's another camper. Or a ranger doing rounds." I tried to see what she was talking about, but all I could make out were shifting shadows and the occasional glint of moonlight on leaves. Still, something about the way Sarah's voice trembled made me uneasy. "Probably nothing," I said, forcing a smile. "But let's keep the fire going, just in case." We laughed it off. That was our first mistake. The night grew colder, and the woods seemed to press in tighter. Every so often, I'd catch a flicker of movement at the edge of the firelight, a branch swaying, a patch of darkness shifting. Once, I heard a low, guttural growl from somewhere deep in the trees. Mark, ever the skeptic, rolled his eyes. "It's just a raccoon," he said, tossing another log on the fire. "Or maybe Bigfoot, if we're lucky." But the animals weren't acting normal. A family of deer that had been grazing nearby bolted suddenly, crashing through the underbrush as if something had spooked them. Even the crickets seemed to fall silent, leaving us in a bubble of uneasy quiet. Jamie tried to lighten the mood. "Okay, new rule, no more creepy stories. Let's talk about something normal, like taxes." That got a laugh, but it was thin, nervous. I could feel the tension winding tighter, like a string pulled to the breaking point. Every time I glanced at the trees, I felt eyes on me, cold, patient, waiting. Sarah kept glancing over her shoulder, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her jacket. "I swear, I keep seeing that light. It's moving. Closer, I think." Mark shook his head. "It's probably just your imagination. Or some hiker with a lantern. People get lost out here all the time." But I wasn't so sure. There was something unnatural about the way the shadows moved, the way the air felt heavy and charged, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. We tried to ignore it, to pretend everything was fine. We told more jokes, roasted the last of the marshmallows, and finally crawled into our tents, the fire burning low. But as I zipped up my sleeping bag, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone, that something was out there, watching, waiting for us to let our guard down. I told myself it was just nerves, just the darkness playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew better. We all did. But the real nightmare began after midnight. I woke to the sound of footsteps crunching in the underbrush. At first, I thought it was just one of my friends stumbling out to answer nature's call. But then I heard it again, slow, deliberate, too heavy to be Jamie's light-footed shuffle or Sarah's careful steps. I held my breath, listening. The night was so still that every sound seemed magnified. The distant rush of the river, the whisper of wind through the pines, and that steady, measured tread circling our camp. I glanced at my watch. 2:13 a.m. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, casting a faint, flickering light that barely reached the edge of the clearing. My tent felt suddenly fragile, a thin barrier between me and whatever was out there. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud in my ears. Then, a new sound, a faint, metallic clink, like glass tapping against metal. I unzipped my tent as quietly as I could, peering out into the darkness. The air was cold, biting, and the world outside looked different, the trees looming like silent sentinels. That's when I saw it. A pale, yellow glow bobbing between the trunks, moving with a slow, unnatural rhythm. It was a lantern, the old-fashioned kind, swinging from the hand of a figure I couldn't quite make out. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to duck back inside, but I couldn't look away. The figure moved closer, the lantern's light illuminating a face that was wrong. Too pale, eyes too wide, mouth set in a grim, unnatural line. The figure didn't make a sound, just stared at our camp, the lantern swaying gently in its grip. Suddenly, Jamie's voice cut through the silence, shaky and low. "Do you guys see that? Please tell me I'm not the only one." Sarah's tent rustled, and she poked her head out, her face drained of color. "What is that? Is it a person?" Mark, ever the skeptic, tried to sound brave. "It's just some weirdo. Probably a lost hiker. I'll go talk to him." Before any of us could stop him, Mark stepped out of his tent, pulling on his boots. He grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the figure. "Hey, you lost or something?" The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, lantern held high, eyes fixed on Mark. The light flickered, casting long, twisted shadows across the ground. Mark took a few steps forward, his voice wavering. "Look, man, you're freaking us out. Do you need help?" That's when the whispers started. Soft at first, like wind through dry leaves, then growing louder, overlapping, impossible to understand. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, curling around us, seeping into our bones. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, and Sarah whimpered, clutching my arm. Jamie was shaking. "We need to get out of here. Now." But Mark kept walking, drawn toward the lantern like a moth to a flame. The figure began to move, gliding backward into the trees, the lantern's glow receding with it. Mark followed, his flashlight beam bobbing wildly. "Mark, stop!" I shouted, but he didn't even look back. The rest of us huddled together, paralyzed by fear. The whispers grew louder, swirling around the camp, making it hard to think, to breathe. The warmth of the fire felt a million miles away, replaced by a cold, suffocating dread. Then, just as suddenly as they'd started, the whispers stopped. The lantern's light vanished, swallowed by the darkness. Mark was gone. We waited, calling his name, our voices trembling. Minutes passed 10, 20, maybe more. The woods were silent, oppressive, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Finally, I grabbed a flashlight and forced myself to move. Jamie and Sarah followed, clinging to each other. We searched the edge of the clearing, calling for Mark, our lights slicing through the blackness. That's when we found his shoe, lying at the edge of the woods, the laces still tied, as if he'd stepped right out of it. But that wasn't all. Next to the shoe was something else, half buried in the dirt. A small, wooden carving, crudely shaped like a lantern, with strange symbols etched into its surface. I picked it up, feeling a jolt of cold run through my fingers. We never found out what it wanted, but it left something behind. We searched until dawn, our voices growing hoarse, our hope fading with every passing hour. Mark was gone, vanished without a trace, as if the woods had swallowed him whole. The only evidence he'd ever been there was that single, abandoned shoe and the carved lantern, heavy with meaning I couldn't begin to understand. We stumbled back to camp, numb and exhausted, the first rays of sunlight filtering through the trees. The warmth of the fire was gone, replaced by a cold that seemed to seep into our bones. We packed up in silence, each of us haunted by what we'd seen, by the questions we couldn't answer. We found his shoe at the edge of the woods. And something else I can't explain. We left that place as soon as the sun was up, barely speaking, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The drive back was a blur, Sarah staring out the window, Jamie gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. No one mentioned Mark. No one dared to say his name, as if speaking it aloud would make what happened real, would force us to admit that he was truly gone. We told the police everything, but they didn't believe us. They searched the woods, found nothing but the shoe and the strange wooden lantern I'd picked up. They said Mark must have wandered off, gotten lost, maybe fallen into the river. But I know what I saw. We all do. The look on that figure's face, the way the whispers seemed to crawl inside your head, the way the woods swallowed Mark without a sound. Nights are the worst now. I dream of lantern light flickering through the trees, of Mark's voice calling out from somewhere I can't reach. Sometimes I wake up clutching that wooden carving, its surface cold and slick with sweat. I've tried to get rid of it, but every time I do, it finds its way back to me. The symbols carved into it still make my skin crawl, slick with sweat. I've tried to get rid of it, but every time I do, it finds its way back to me. The symbols carved into it still make my skin crawl. If anyone knows what this symbol means, let me know in the comments. I still have it. I don't know if it's a warning, a curse, or something else entirely. All I know is that I'll never go back to those woods. Not for anything. That was just the beginning. The next story is even worse. After what happened with Mark, I stopped camping with friends. For a while, I stopped camping altogether. But the woods have a way of calling you back, especially when you're trying to outrun your own thoughts. Months later, I found myself packing up my gear for a solo trip, telling myself I just needed some quiet, some space to breathe. I picked a state park I'd never visited before, far enough from home to feel like an escape, but not so remote that I couldn't convince myself it was safe. The drive out was uneventful, the kind of long, winding road that lets your mind wander. I arrived late in the afternoon, the sun slanting through the trees, painting everything gold. The campground was almost empty, just a few empty picnic tables, a scattering of fire pits, and a faded map tacked to a weathered sign. No cars, no voices, not even the distant thump of a radio. Just me, the wind, and the hush of the forest. At first, the solitude felt like a gift. I set up my tent in the best spot I could find, right by a little creek, the water burbling over smooth stones. I made a small fire, cooked a simple meal, and let the silence settle around me. There was a peace to it, a sense of being completely alone in the world, with nothing but the trees and the sky for company. But as the sun dipped lower, that peace started to feel thin, fragile. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was absolute, pressing in on all sides. No distant laughter, no crackle of another campfire, not even the usual chorus of birds and insects. Just the sound of my own breathing and the uneasy feeling that I was being watched. I should have left when I realized I was the only one there. But I told myself it was nothing, just nerves. I had no idea what was really waiting for me in the silence. The first night passed in uneasy quiet. I woke several times, convinced I'd heard footsteps crunching in the gravel outside my tent. But every time I listened, there was nothing, just the wind, or maybe the creek playing tricks on my ears. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself I was just being paranoid. I made coffee, watched the mist rise off the water, and tried to shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't until I went to refill my water bottle that I noticed the footprints. They weren't mine, too large, too deep, and spaced wrong, as if whoever made them had an odd, loping gait. They circled my tent, then disappeared into the brush. I crouched down, tracing the outline with my finger, and felt a cold prickle run up my spine. I told myself it was just a ranger, maybe checking the site while I slept. But I hadn't heard a car, and there were no other campers. Later, I realized my flashlight was missing. I'd left it on the picnic table the night before, but now it was gone. I searched everywhere inside the tent, under the table, even along the creek, but it had vanished. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself I'd just misplaced it, but the laughter sounded hollow in the empty air. That afternoon, I decided to check in with the ranger station, just to be safe. The building was locked, but there was a radio mounted outside for emergencies. I pressed the call button, feeling a little ridiculous, and waited. After a long pause, a voice crackled through the static. "Ranger station, what's your emergency?" Hi," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm at the lower campground. I just wanted to check in. There's no one else here, and I think someone's been walking around my site." There was a pause, longer than I expected. "You're alone out there?" "Yeah. Is that a problem?" Another pause. "No, not a problem. Just stay in your tent after dark, okay? Don't wander around. If you hear anything, don't go looking for it." I frowned, pressing the radio closer. "Is there something I should know? Are there bears or—" The ranger cut me off. "Just follow the rules. Stay in your tent after dark. We'll check in tomorrow." The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, the radio buzzing in my hand, feeling more alone than ever. The sun was already starting to dip behind the trees, shadows stretching long and thin across the ground. I went back to my site, double-checked the zippers on my tent, and tried to convince myself that everything was fine. But as the last light faded, I couldn't shake the ranger's words. He told me to stay in my tent after dark. He didn't say why. I wish I'd listened. That night, the silence was so complete it felt unnatural, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I lay in my tent, cocooned in my sleeping bag, listening for the usual sounds of the forest crickets, the distant gurgle of the creek, the wind in the trees. But there was nothing, not a single chirp or rustle, just the faint, steady thump of my own heart and the soft hiss of my breath. The comfort of the tent, the thin nylon walls, felt suddenly fragile, like a soap bubble in a world that had turned predatory. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that the ranger's warning had gotten under my skin. But the silence pressed in, heavy and absolute, until I started to feel like I was underwater, every sound muffled and distant. I turned off my lantern, hoping the darkness would help me sleep, but it only made things worse. My mind conjured shapes in the blackness, shadows that seemed to move just out of sight. Then, I heard a soft crunch, like gravel underfoot, just outside my tent. I froze, every muscle tensed, straining to listen. Another step, closer this time. I held my breath, heart pounding so loudly I was sure whoever or whatever was out there could hear it. The footsteps circled my tent, slow and deliberate, pausing every few seconds as if listening for a response. I reached for my missing flashlight, only to remember it was gone. All I had was my pocket knife, which felt useless against the unknown. I stayed perfectly still, hoping the intruder would move on. But the footsteps didn't fade. They multiplied. I could hear at least 2, maybe 3 sets, moving in a slow, methodical pattern around my tent. A shadow passed across the thin fabric, tall and impossibly thin, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. I bit down on a gasp, clamping a hand over my mouth. Another shadow joined it, then another, their forms flickering in the faint moonlight. I could hear them breathing low, raspy, almost inhuman. The air inside the tent grew cold, and I felt a prickling sensation crawl up my spine. Suddenly, something brushed against the tent, a long, thin finger dragging slowly across the nylon. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it to stop, but the touch came again, firmer this time, as if testing the barrier between us. The zipper at the tent's entrance began to move, inching up from the bottom. Panic surged through me. I lunged forward, pressing my weight against the flap, trying to keep it closed. The zipper stopped, and for a moment, everything was still. Then chaos erupted. The tent shook violently, hands pressing against the sides, shadows writhing in the moonlight. I screamed, kicking and thrashing, desperate to break free. The tent collapsed around me, poles snapping, fabric tangling around my legs. I clawed my way out, gasping for air, and stumbled into the open. The campground was pitch black, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. I could barely see, but I could feel them shapes moving just beyond the edge of my vision, silent and watchful. I ran, tripping over roots and rocks, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the trees, the world reduced to a blur of shadows and fear. I saw the glint of my car in the distance, a lifeline in the darkness. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice before finally unlocking the door. I dove inside, slamming the door behind me, and locked it. For a long time, I just sat there, shaking, staring out into the darkness, waiting for anything to move. But nothing did. The silence returned, deeper than before. I stayed in the car until the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, too afraid to sleep, too afraid to move. When I finally worked up the courage to get out, the campground looked exactly as it had the day before. My tent was a crumpled mess, my gear scattered, but there was no sign of anyone else. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing to prove what I'd seen. It was as if the night had swallowed everything whole. I still don't know what they were, but I know they're still out there. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can hear them breathing, feel their eyes on me from the shadows. As I packed up to leave, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. The paper was damp, the ink smeared, but the message was clear: you were lucky. I drove home with every mirror checked, every shadow on the roadside making my heart race. Sleep didn't come easy after that night. Even now, months later, I'll wake up in the dark, convinced I hear those same slow footsteps circling my bed, or see a flicker of movement just outside my window. I keep the lights on more than I'd like to admit. I haven't been camping alone since. But what really gets under my skin is what I found when I started digging. I looked up the campground online, searching for any mention of what I'd experienced. The official site was bare, no warnings, no reviews, just a handful of stock photos and a phone number that always went to voicemail. But on old forums and buried comment threads, I found stories. People who'd gone missing, others who'd left in the middle of the night, never explaining why. A few posts hinted at the watchers, at a silence so deep it felt alive. One person claimed the rangers knew more than they let on, that the park had a history of quietly closing off certain sites, only to reopen them months later with no explanation. I can't prove any of it. Maybe it's just paranoia, or maybe there's something out there that doesn't want to be found. If you've heard of the silent campground, message me. I think there's more to this, something bigger than just one bad night. But nothing compares to the last story. This one, I almost didn't survive. Some of my best memories come from summers at the lake. Every year, my family would load up the car with coolers, fishing rods, and enough snacks to feed an army, and we'd make the long drive to a remote spot tucked deep in the woods. It was the kind of place that felt frozen in time, no cell service, no neighbors, just the hush of the forest and the gentle lap of water against the shore. My parents called it our secret place, and for a long time, it really did feel like a secret, a world apart from everything else. We had our rituals. Dad would set up the old canvas tent while Mom unpacked the food. My little brother and I would race down to the dock, daring each other to jump in first, the water always colder than we remembered. We'd spend the days swimming, fishing, and exploring the trails that wound through the trees. At night, we'd sit around the fire, roasting marshmallows and telling stories, some true, some made up on the spot. The lake was our playground, our sanctuary, and I never felt safer than I did in those moments, surrounded by family and the familiar sounds of summer. Of course, there were always the jokes about the lake monster. It was a running gag. Dad would claim he saw something big and scaly in the water, and my brother would pretend to be dragged under by invisible tentacles. We'd laugh, splash, and make up wild stories about what might be lurking in the deep. It was all harmless fun, the kind of thing you never really believe. But looking back, I realize how much we took for granted. The innocence of those summers, the sense that nothing bad could ever happen in a place so full of light and laughter. We always joked about the lake monster. We didn't know how close we were. It started small, the kind of things you brush off as quirks of nature. One morning, we woke to find a line of dead fish washed up along the shore, their silver bodies glinting in the early light. Dad said it was probably just a change in the water, maybe a drop in temperature or a storm upstream. But the smell was sharp and wrong, and even the birds seemed to avoid the shoreline that day. Then there were the ripples, not the gentle waves from a passing breeze, but deep, rolling swells that would appear out of nowhere, even when the air was perfectly still. Sometimes, as we sat on the dock, we'd see the water bulge and churn, as if something massive was moving just beneath the surface. My brother would joke, "There's the monster again," and we'd all laugh, but I noticed how Dad's eyes lingered on the water a little longer each time. The real fear didn't set in until the afternoon my brother disappeared. It was just after lunch, the sun high and hot, the air buzzing with the sound of cicadas. We'd been swimming, daring each other to see who could hold their breath the longest. I remembered diving under, the world going silent and green, then surfacing to find him gone. At first, I thought he was playing a trick, hiding under the dock or behind the reeds. But when I called his name, there was no answer. Panic set in fast. My parents ran down from the campsite, shouting, searching the water, the woods, everywhere. We found nothing, no splash, no sign of struggle, just a single sandal floating near the edge of the dock. The police came, then divers, then search dogs. They found nothing. The official story was that he must have gotten caught in the weeds and drowned, his body swept away by the current. But I knew that lake. There was no current strong enough to do that, not in the shallow water where we'd been playing. We tried to go home, to put it behind us, but the questions never left. My parents stopped talking about the lake, and the annual trips ended. I'd catch my dad staring at the old fishing rods in the garage, his face tight and haunted. My mom would flinch at the sound of running water. I started having nightmares, dark shapes moving beneath the surface, something cold and ancient reaching up from the depths. We thought it was just a tragic accident, until we saw what was in the water. A week after my brother vanished, I went back to the lake with my dad. He said he needed closure, that maybe we'd missed something. The water was still, the air heavy with the scent of decay. As we stood on the dock, I saw it, a massive, sinuous shape gliding just below the surface, too big to be a fish, too smooth to be a log. For a moment, it surfaced, and I caught a glimpse of something pale and slick, with eyes that glinted like whetstones. That night, I saw it for myself. The lake was beautiful that evening, the kind of beauty that makes you forget how quickly things can change. The water was glassy, reflecting the last streaks of orange and pink from the setting sun. The air was cool, the kind of cool that settles on your skin and makes you feel alive. I remember thinking, for just a moment, that maybe everything would be okay. That maybe what I'd seen earlier was just a trick of the light, a shadow, a log drifting beneath the surface. I wanted to believe it so badly. But as night fell, the lake changed. The colors faded, the water turned black, and the woods pressed in close, their shapes twisting in the darkness. I sat on the dock, legs dangling over the edge, listening to the gentle lap of water against the wood. My dad was inside the tent, pretending to sleep, but I could hear him tossing and turning, haunted by the same questions that kept me awake. That's when I heard a low, guttural sound, like something breathing just beneath the surface. I leaned forward, peering into the darkness, and saw the water ripple, slow and deliberate. My heart hammered in my chest. I told myself to get up, to go back to the tent, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, caught between fear and curiosity. Then it surfaced, not all at once, but in pieces, a pale, slick back breaking the water, then a long, sinuous neck, and finally a head that was all wrong. Its eyes were too far apart, black and unblinking, and its mouth was a jagged line that seemed to stretch too wide. It watched me, silent and patient, as if it had all the time in the world. I scrambled to my feet, nearly slipping off the dock. The creature slid closer, its body undulating beneath the water, sending out slow, oily ripples. I could see scars along its back, old wounds that hadn't healed right, and something about the way it moved made my skin crawl. It was ancient, I realized. Older than the lake, older than the trees. It belonged to a world I couldn't understand. I ran, feet pounding the dock, breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear the water churning behind me, the creature following, relentless and silent. I reached the shore and sprinted for the tent, shouting for my dad. He burst out, flashlight in hand, and shone it toward the water. For a split second, the beam caught the creature's eyes, and they glowed a cold, unnatural light that seemed to burn right through me. Then it was gone, slipping beneath the surface without a sound. The water stilled, the night returned to its unnatural quiet, and I collapsed on the ground, shaking and sobbing. My dad held me, whispering that it was over, that we were safe, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He'd seen it too. The next morning, we packed up in silence. As we loaded the car, an old man from the nearest cabin wandered over, his face weathered and unreadable. He looked at me, then at the lake, and shook his head. "You saw it, didn't you?" he said, voice low and rough. I nodded, unable to speak. He spat into the dirt. "You're lucky. Most folks who see it don't come back. Best you forget about this place. The lake keeps its secrets, and the folks around here know better than to ask questions." My dad tried to press him for answers, but the old man just shrugged. Some things are older than memory. Some things you leave alone. You want to live, you stay away from the water after dark. That's all I'll say. We left that day, and I haven't been back since. But the nightmares never stopped. Sometimes I wake up with the taste of lake water in my mouth, the feeling of something cold and slimy brushing against my skin. I still have the scar's thin, white lines along my calf, where something grabbed me as I scrambled out of the water. My doctor said it was just a scrape from a rock, but I know better. The locals know. They just don't talk about it. I've tried to find answers, but every time I reach out, I get the same response: silence, or a warning to let it go. But I can't. Not when I still hear it calling me back, in dreams and in the quiet moments just before dawn. I still have the scars, and sometimes I hear it calling me back. We never went back to the lake after that summer. My parents sold the old tent, boxed up the fishing gear, and tucked away the photos from those trips in a drawer we never opened again. We stopped talking about it, as if silence could keep the memories at bay. But the nightmares followed me home. Even now, years later, I'll wake up gasping, convinced I hear water lapping at my window or see those cold, black eyes watching from the shadows of my room. Sometimes I wonder if it's just trauma, my mind trying to make sense of something impossible. But then I'll catch a glimpse of my scars in the mirror, or hear a story about someone else disappearing near a quiet, forgotten lake, and I know it wasn't just a dream. There's something out there, something old and hungry, and I don't think it's finished with me. I still feel it sometimes, a pull, a compulsion to go back, to stand on that dock and look into the water. I fight it, but the urge never really goes away. Maybe it never will. If you've seen anything like this, tell me. I need to know I'm not alone. Maybe together we can piece together what's really hiding in those dark, forgotten places. 3 stories, 3 warnings. But there's one last thing you need to know. So, those are my stories, 3 warnings from the edge of the wild. A friend lost to the Lantern Man, a night stalked by silent watchers, a family tradition shattered by something ancient in the water. I wish I could tell you I found answers, that I pieced together the truth behind what happened. But the woods don't give up their secrets so easily. Every time I think I've put it behind me, something small, a sound, a dream, a half-remembered detail pulls me right back in. Maybe you're listening to this from the safety of your living room, or with friends around a bright campfire, convinced that nothing could ever reach you there. But the line between comfort and terror is thinner than you think. I used to believe the same thing. Now I know better. Some things in the woods can't be explained, but they can find you, even when you think you're safe. I know I'm not the only one with stories like these. I've read your comments, your theories, your warnings about places I should never visit. Some of you have sent in your own encounters strange lights, missing time, things that move just out of sight. If you have a story, share it. Maybe together, we can figure out what's really out there, hiding in the dark, waiting for someone to notice. And if you recognize any of the details, the symbol on the wooden lantern, the silence that falls before something terrible, the feeling of being watched by something you can't see, let me know. I keep track of every message, every clue. Maybe one day, we'll connect the dots. Until then, stay safe. Trust your instincts. And next time you're out there, listen closely. You might not be as alone as you think.